And welcome back, everybody. It's Creative Redundancy back again. And you guys all know me as the one known as CR. And welcome to this late night stream with me. While I wait for some people to drop in here, decided to do a late night stream. I've actually been meaning to do one like all week. Let's just say I've had to find some time and energy to do this. And, a little bit of coffee might help too. So, while I wait for some people to drop in, I've already said a hello to the folks out there in my chat world right now already because I wrote it before I started the stream, like usual. So, while I wait for some people, first and foremost, I just want to say, well, mic check because I'm pretty sure it's working because my indicator is working, but I'm trying something else out right now. So, but first and foremost, I want to say this. I wrote this in my community board as a post, right? So, but like, you know, keep keep some people in your thoughts tonight, this evening, this morning, wherever you are in the world, right? You know, some people out there are going for a lot right now. Overall, for because water, fire, or for some people out there, unfortunately, through earthquakes, right? There was another one, right? And apparently they're both these last two, which includes Columbia one. They're in the sun hemisphere right now, but anywhere along the Pacific Rim can be affected by that, right? Some other effects that can result, and stuff like that. Hello, Holly. How are you doing? Hopefully you're doing well. So, like I said, I am trying something new. I'll actually show you guys. Hopefully, I remember. Let's see. Didn't I do this fancy? I'm using one of those inductive charging things. So, I'm actually trying this out finally. So, that is what I'm using here. Things. Oh, I appreciate that, Holly. That's very nice of you to see. So, yes, I appreciate that. You as well. You as well. All right. Yeah. Right. Resilience starts within. Within. Right. Right. As difficult as challenging it can be at times. That's for sure. As there's a lot of things testing our resolve lately, me included. I'm not immune to it either, right? It's not like I live on a distant world or whatever. I live here with you guys in terms of on the planet, right? It's just a different location, a different continent, a different country, a different province or state or whatever, right? But, you know, things can still happen here. I know that, right? And besides, some of us, or many of us, right? We know our people around the world, not just in our own state or country, right? But other people around the world, right? For our connections and stuff like that. For our viewers too, right? And many of us content creators have. We have that quote unquote international audience, right? It's not just the audience here in North America, right? Here in Canada or in the US or in the US. That's good for you, Holly. Yeah. Hang in there. You got a virtual fist bump. Virtual fist bump for me, Holly. It's like boom, right? Or maybe hug. Wait, never mind. It sounded better than it looked. But yeah, yeah, I mean, if anything, that's the most important thing I'll probably say all night, all day, or this whole stream, right? And it's probably the most important thing, right? So, in retrospect to everything that are going on, right? Like, including myself, I've had some issues going down. I mean, I kind of mentioned this in an earlier post earlier in the year. Well, still dealing with something. Some people know more details, but what I will say is that it was a lot of effort. I would just say a lot of effort, and I've been like I've recorded some footage for this, but what I mean, I'm not gonna go into too many details yet, but because I'm considering on making a video out of it, because I technically did record parts of this uh, situation, let's just say. So, well, let's just say it's definitely testing my resolve among some other things, and allow me to get a sense of being in someone else's shoes, right? Like in preparedness, it's just like you plan for this, that, whatever it is, right? It could be some financial collapse, right? It could be natural, flooding, fire, earthquake, or whatever, right? But I mean, like, it's one thing to say this or that, or you know, test some preps or try some stuff out, right? Gain some skill, knowledge, and experience too, right? But sometimes in but when the real world really shows you it for real, it's not a test, it's not a simulation or a simulation of it, right? Or let's pretend, right? It's the real deal, right? You start to see what you're really gonna do for it, right? You know, for whatever it is, right? Like you can simulate, oh, I'm gonna bug out from because of fire, right? Yeah, you can test it out, mock it, simulate it, right? But let's face it, right? It's still a simulation, right? In this kind of test or scenario, right? You're not the roads you're going down to quote unquote test your bug out or whatever or your evacuation, right? Remember, it's not really happening, right? So you're not on busy roads, you know, water or fire coming in and stuff like that, really coming in normally and stuff like that, where the real stress comes from, right? Yeah, you can simulate it and run drills and hey, if this happens, do this, right? Yeah, and I get that support, right? But you know, it's still kind of a simulation. It's not totally 100% real because you can't generate these actual things that would actually happen, right? Uh, it's just like you want to do this earthquake preparedness thing. Yeah, I'm all yeah. Go test out certain things, try and time yourself or whatever, right? And stuff like that. But you know, you ain't shaking the ground in your simulation, right? I mean, the trees aren't on fire for real in your simulation. The water's not coming rushing in your simulation, right? You know what I mean? You know, yeah, you can simulate maybe some rain or something like that, but that's not the same, right? That's not the same as actual flood water coming in and being up high. Smoke and fire like down the street or whatever, right? You cannot simulate that. Right? It's either real or it isn't, in my opinion, anyways. Air hug. Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, Holly. But yeah, I mean, this is why, you know, even getting a taste of that, right? Really, really shows what you're made out of, right? How resilient you are, right? Because it will test your resolve, your patience, your ability to communicate, connect, get things done, right? You know, and stuff like that. Like I said, you can simulate. Oh, hey, I got 5 minutes to evac or whatever, right? Or whatever time you want to set for it, right? But you don't have the what's it called? The actual things that are like pushing your buttons during that time, right? Real stress, right? I mean, how do you simulate that? you know, you know. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially since September's coming around the corner in the next, like, what, 6, today's the 14th, right? Well, 15th, depending where you are, but yeah, we're halfway through the month, right? So, and National Preparedness Month is next month in September, so. And I'm pretty sure that starts on a Monday, if I remember right. I'm trying to remember. I think September 1st is on the Monday. Don't quote me on that. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember from based on upon that I've been scheduling videos in advance. And usually my scheduled videos are on Fridays, so. Well, actually, today's Friday, the 14th, so that would be the 28th. Yeah, the 28th would be on a Friday, so 31 days in August, so Tuesday, yeah. So September should start on a Tuesday. I had to use some deduction to figure that out without looking at a calendar and without looking at my phone at a calendar or whatever, right? I'm like, oh yeah, today's the 14th, and it's Friday. Clearly, I can add 14 to that, and then the 28th, and add 3 more days, and then, you know, guesstimate that time and date and all that stuff. But yeah, you know, I've decided to bring a little friend to this stream. We'll see. We'll see if we'll see if I show it or not. It may sprout your interest. I decided to bring it beside me. Maybe it'll help. Maybe it'll help. I've shown it. Well, I've known I've shown it before because I've shown it in one of my previous videos earlier. Well, would have been technically last month in June. I mean June, July. Where's my head at June? Last month was July, Sierra. Last month was July, but I mean, so you know, yeah. I went on a tangent and I just lost my train of thought. But yeah. So, like I said, I am trying to bring together something for next month for National Preparedness Month to chime in something for real, and I say for real, right? Or at least somewhat real. Well, it was real for me, for anyone that knows the details, but you know, like hopefully, fingers crossed, I can actually get the content out. It's actually the words I'm looking for. The footage will kind of write itself, explain itself, but there is some story, a little bit of an anecdote or exposition that I have to mention in there, right? And I've been like this whole time that this has happened, I was like been thinking like what to say for this, right? I was like, I've been thinking about it for a while now, and just like trying to find the words to say, right, and stuff like that, you know. So like it may be one of those things where I voice over a lot of the footage, but not the information, but the story and the footage will will explain everything, right, in due time. I don't know. I'm hoping that I can chime in for next month, right? So I may have to rearrange my video schedule a little bit here, you know. And speak of that, I actually have been recording some video in the time that I've had lately. Like, there's another video I gotta record. I still haven't recorded it. I keep saying this. I gotta bring back another update to the 5-gallon bucket challenge, right? Let's just say I have the tomatoes friend next to me, and technically, I have its friend beside me right now. It's a little bit bigger. Let's just say, right? I should almost look back at the footage and see how tall it originally was, but it's sitting beside me right now. Oh, dang. Clearly, I will show this right now. Screw it. Screw it. Hold on. I will show this. See? No word of... See? No word of lie. Oh, sorry. I have it on the wrong mode. Let me turn to... Whoa. Because Howie's here. See? Howie? No word of lie. It is beside me. And I know all you gardeners and sunflower lovers out there know what that means. Right there. Yes, hello, Howie. I appreciate you dropping by once again. Nice to see you again and again. Because as actually I saw you earlier. Well, quote unquote in the chat, right? So that's a little clip for you guys. I'm still charging my phone. Right. I'm only at like 50%. I'm using an induction charger, so I'm trying this out. I appreciate that, Howie. Yeah. I knew if I was just like, nowhere will I, Howie. I was just like, hey, maybe I should bring the sunflower in. Maybe Shadi will show up. I'm like, eh. Then I was thinking, Howie's probably gone to bed. Right? Here I am. I'm like, no, clearly Howie hasn't gone to bed because he's here in my chat right now at the moment, right? So I was just like, yeah, see how I I planned that ahead for once. For once, I was just like, probably the only stage prop that I need to show, right? Of course, the light that I have with me, right? So there, yeah. Now you've been canny like a wild man. How he's a wild man. Dun, dun. I better not start singing. But yeah. So, like I said, I've been working on this video for a while, actually. It's like, clearly I've been working on it for a while because it's been a long time for it. So, but like I said, I'm just coming up with the words and some extra footage to add in there, right? So, I mean, I won't go into details just because, but I just say I had to move a lot of things. Like, I'm actually technically I'm sitting in the garage right now. Right? I had the door shut because there's still mosquitoes outside right now, even though it's not. I mean, it's only like I think it's like 16 Celsius, 16 Fahrenheit out, right? So it's not. I mean, it's not cold, obviously, but I mean, maybe you want more in this weather. I mean, I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt, obviously, because there's mosquitoes, but and I'm wearing one of my gaiters or buffs right now to cover my ears and stuff like that, just in case. Oh, I see. You had the water? Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll show an appearance of something. I just need my battery to charge up a little bit more. I should have charged it before. Well, I did try to charge up before I started the stream, but I needed some more time. Hold on one sec. Alright, sorry about that. You know how it goes when you're live, right? Somehow, always have to be aware of things, and obviously it's live, so anything can happen. Or, I don't know, something like that. Or something unexpected, right? And stuff like that. Wow, that's very nice. Wow. That's so awesome. With an O and a W and an S for super awesome. So right? Yeah. Man, it's like having this sunflower. I don't know. I kind of I've been growing fond of having a version like this every year now since I started trying this out. All right, obviously this sunflower, it's just like it's like a travel size sunflower. Because technically back in July when it was a little bit shorter, obviously, and younger and not as old, right? I kind of brought it over to this kind of quote unquote barbecue, right? Where I was sharing some time with some local gardeners, actually, and stuff like that. I mean, that's not the only thing they do, but like they also garden too, right? They have their garden spaces too, right? So they got their tomatoes, their their flowers for the pollinators and stuff like that. I mean, chives, flowers. I'm trying to remember what else they got. One of them has peppers, maybe garlic. What else is there? I mean, I didn't see the peonies during that time because they weren't. They had well in July they weren't at that time because it was the beginning of the month. So technically, I did. Was it July? It might have been June. Well, one or two. But the peonies weren't blooming yet, right? So and stuff like that. So I brought it over. I'm like, hey, see, I brought over a friend. Right. So it's just like standing right behind me. Well, on like a desk or on a picnic table or whatever you want to call it, right? On a chair. I just brought it up. I mean, it's just something I do now. you know, just for fun, right? It's kind of funny the looks I get at times. Is just like, right? Because especially it's one thing if I bring it out now, or did, right? Because unless you take a closer look, you have no idea. You know it's a plant, you can tell, but you don't know. May not know exactly without a closer look, right? Especially if you're like 50 feet away, right? But once it blooms, that's a different story, right? Because obviously the bloom would stand out a lot more, right? I mean, you just see a guy holding something and there's like this big yellow dot, right? It's just, hey, what is that? Right? You know? So perhaps I'll do it again. Perhaps I do it again once it blooms. And as it won't bloom, yeah, it probably won't. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it'll bloom by this time next week, right? In this third week of August. My little traveling sunflower and stuff. Wow, you're putting a what? I mean, before I read that, I mean, they were very happy with the free food. No, of course, right? I would imagine most people would be, right? Not just happy, but grateful too, right? I mean, like, with everything going on and stuff like that, I'll come back to that. But I mean, like, you're putting in a greenhouse, okay? Cool, cool. Yeah, yeah. Try to preserve them so maximize the fruits of your labor, right? Right? As much as possible, right? Right? Because yeah, because right now it's kind of harvest season, right? August, September, well, obviously October too, to a certain degree, right? But generally, it's like this whole the rest of this month and probably most of September, if not all of September, and maybe parts of October, depending where you are, right? In the world and stuff like that, right? Especially in the northern hemisphere, right? As we come into fall soon, right? Because technically, it's like what 5 weeks away, right? Technically, equinox time again, right? So yeah, so there's this harvest, right? And something else to keep in mind is just like the importance of the food itself, right? Especially with everything going down lately, right? Flooded out fields to it hasn't rained quote unquote here for weeks and weeks. Because I actually do, every so often, I will ask some people in the side chats, right? That's basically my side chat because I haven't been live long enough and I haven't been live that much this summer. But and there are people's chats, right? Especially some people that I've kind of asked on and off, right? You know, see if they got any rain or whatever, right? You know, some places haven't gotten much rain. You know, they're barely keeping the plants going, right, for what it is, right? You know, they're pulling out every trick in the book, right? You know, drip irrigation, watering in the morning, in the evening, if possible, right? Deep watering, drip irrigation, mulch, and all that stuff. Pulling out all the stops, all the tricks out there that are possible to keep something going. Let's just say a tomato plant, for example, right? Could be a pepper plant too, right? And doing what they can, right? You know. So I mean, it's just the way it is, right? You know, this season, this this season, this summer of 2026, right? Right. If you know, for anyone that has if it's been a balanced summer for you, be be extremely grateful about that, right? If you haven't had any issues this summer, be extremely grateful out there, right? Because some people are going through a lot more serious things, a lot more headaches, a lot more serious situations right now, right? So, like, you know, or if you think things are bad, remember, in retrospect, to everything else that's going on, right? You know, some people out there don't have the water required for their plants, for example, right? They have drinking water, but they don't have enough for their plants, right? Some people are like smoked out or hazed out due to forest fires, right? Some people are flooded out due to water, right? And some people, like I said earlier, are, you know, gone through a major seismic activity, right? And stuff like that. I mean, I saw the footage out there, some of the footage out there, and not just from the mainstream. I went deeper into it, right, and saw some air footage that the mainstream didn't actually show. Some what I would call, you can call it as B-roll or whatever, secondary, right? But I was just like, because it showed a lot more, right, and it really makes you like appreciate having a roof over your head, walls, right, and stuff like that, right? Like even right now, I'm in an enclosed spot, right? So as long as the mosquitoes aren't really in here with me, I'm good, right? You know, I'm not really be like, bzzz, and it's like, you know, if you randomly hear me going like that, well, that means I've actually had to slap a mosquito or slap my head because there's a bug on my back of my head that's bugging me, right, and stuff like that. Oh, okay, noted, Helly. Yeah, noted, noted. All right. I mean, like I said, I feel sorry for some of those people, or bad. I should say bad for those people, right? It's, you know, that's probably of all many things out there, an extremely dicey situation, right? You know, and stuff like that. I think if anything, right, at least it happened during the day, right? Better than happening at night, right? Because I think like Colombia, it happened what 7:30, 8 o'clock local time for them, right? So in the morning, all right. So some people are up or eventually getting up or eventually going to work, I guess, right? So for some people, right? Not a lot of people are in buildings yet, right? You know, and stuff like that. You know, and stuff like that. I was just like I said, I've seen some of that footage out there. I was just like, you know, it made me, wow, wow. Truthfully, it made me find the words to say in that post that I made earlier in the week about it, right? You can go check that out, right? I decided to use an image as a metaphor. I rarely do that, but I decided to add this in because it kind of summed it up better, right? In terms of what's going down. Of all the things I could use, right? I don't usually do that, but usually for those kind of posts, but I decided to add that in, right? As anyone out there can search that out and see that footage out there, see them, right? Because that is the real world that we're in, right? Right now, right? You know, everything's great until it's not, right? Everything's great until you got no food. Everything's great until you got no water. Everything's great until you got no shelter. Everything's great, right? Everything's great until the system that saves you substantial time every moment. That kind of system isn't working, right? And then what? Who are you without that? All right, that system, the JIT, not to be confused with another channel, right? That will remain in my core as part of me, right? I'll just say it like that, right? Like, you know, because there's something that's not discussed a lot at times, right? Is kind of, I mean, I've been thinking about doing this kind of video a long time ago, actually, for a while now, but I don't know. I might be able to kind of add some things into my quote unquote next video, which I've been talking about, right? But there's something that is very rarely talked about, right? In the preparedness community, right? People, yeah, people talk about their pantries, the water, of course, right? Cover elements like shelter and stuff like that, communication, security, blah blah blah, right, and stuff like that, right? But very, very rarely the loss of not just gear and things, but people that you care about, right? And stuff like that. That's rarely expressed out there, right? It's always, here's the next thing, right? Here's the next thing. Watch out for this, right? Yeah, and I get that. That's kind of important too, right? But, just something I've been thinking about. Well, I mean, it depends on your activity level too, Howie, right? Right. I mean, if it's 40, 104 plus degrees out, I mean, you're probably gonna need a lot more water than you realize, right? Like, if you're like, down, let's just say, see, I don't want to use certain terms right now, but if you're out of the sun, out of the heat, not doing a lot of activity, you may be able to go a little bit longer, right? I mean, because there's exertion, right, and stuff like that. Because also we're always exerting energy out, metabolic energy, right? The calories that the food energy that we put in, whatever it is, right? Fruits, vegetables, meats, blah blah blah, and all that stuff, right? That gives us the energy to do something, right? Keep our brain going, keep our heart beating, keep our muscles going, and all that stuff, right? And stuff like that. The water that we're kind of sweating out or evaporating out, like even something as simple as talk. Like, for anyone that has seen anyone do any public speaking or anything like that, you realize that there's always like a bottle of water or a cup of water nearby, because when you're talking, your mouth's always, you know, so, and your mouth gets dry, right? So, I mean, just think about it like that, you know. So yeah, But generally, it is within that 72 hours, give or take, right? Even the first day, you'll probably notice something, right? And that's assuming you're not, you know, gushing out somewhere, cut, let's just say, right? Bleeding out or whatever, that kind of stuff, right? That's not even assuming that, or your exertion level or whatever, right? Because, like I said, if it's humid, hot, and you're sweating, that time goes down, right? Because you're, I mean, mathematically, like, let's just say let's just say a liter of water per day. Although it's supposed to be like a gallon, right? 4 liters or whatever. I'm just gonna say liter or quart or pint or whatever, just because it's easier number, right? If you're putting in, let's say, a liter of water every day, right, to maintain something or whatever, right? You're not very active. That's one thing or whatever, right? You're just sitting, relative room temperature, maybe 16 Celsius, 16 Fahrenheit, right? Something that you're not sweating in it or whatever, right? Not exerting yourself much. I mean, that's one thing, but you're exerting yourself. It's 40 Celsius, 104 Fahrenheit or higher, high humidity. You're sweating. You could be sweating out more than you can take in. Therefore, right, mathematically, a liter minus 1.1 liters of water going out, well, you're going to be in a negative. And eventually that will catch up to you. It will take a little bit longer, but it will eventually catch up, too. Well, some of us, we're not all like that, unfortunately, Howie. Unfortunately, we're not all like that, right? Let's see where my chin is. Okay. Alright, we're not all like that. So. Like right now, I could grab a snack if I wanted to. I'm just drinking something right now. Non-alcoholic, non-adult beverage. And stuff, right? I mean, let's just say, technically, I got things around me right now. Because I can physically see them. And a couple of things kind of stashed away at the moment, right? Rearranged around, right? Stuff like that. I mean, if I did a pocket one of those gearhead pocket guns right now, I'd be like, here's my keys, here's this, here's that, alright? Or whatever, right? Speak of which, I gotta rearrange this. Speak of keys, I gotta rearrange one of my clips on there. Because apparently it gets snagged on something. I gotta rearrange this. Because actually, I do actually have my keys in hand right now. Which, I think of all things, to keep in mind is, because let's think about this, right? If you're, like I said, remembering being in other people's shoes at times, right? So these seismic activities, right? Like, I live more inland, so obviously the odds of that is very small, right? But, hey, like, other people out there, right? I do, or I could, or I have traveled in the past, right? I might have been, like, like Howie, like, I might have been, like, in Vancouver, right? Is it possible? Yes, it is possible, because it's on the edge, right? It is by the Pacific, right? The Ring of Fire, right? So it is possible, right? It's probably unlikely for the time that I'm visiting Vancouver, let's just say, right? And I'm talking about here in Canada, right? But for you guys in the U.S., this could be like San Francisco or whatever, right? Along California or whatever, right? On that path, right? But, like, because I haven't been down in Vancouver for a while, right? Because actually, I technically have relatives there, right? So this is also why I keep tabs on this too, right? Right. I might not know someone specifically in Colombia, right? However, all it takes is just like, oh, let's just have the seismic activity up on in the northern hemisphere, right? Well, then I'd be making some calls, checking in, right, making sure, right, especially if I just found out, right, and stuff like that. But where I'm leading this kind of part of this stream is like sometimes the most important things are the things you have on you at that time, right? Because unfortunately, you know, in the day-to-day activities or whatever, right? Yeah, people have their everyday carry, their EDC, things in their pockets, all that stuff, right? But like realistically, right? Generally, right? You're probably not having a backpack on you at that time, unless for some reason you're actually walking with it, right? Right? And you're probably like, hey, Senior, you know, my get-on bags in my truck, in my car, in my vehicle, right? Yeah, that's great, right? That's great, right? But you park your truck, your car in a parkade, and there's a big slab of concrete on it right now. It might as well be on Mars, on the moon, right? Because you don't have access to it. You don't have the strength to lift that. You don't have access to it, right? So it might as well be on Mars or on the moon or whatever out there, right? Because you have no access to it at that moment, right? So, or it might be unsafe to attempt to get it, right? Or because you can't locate your vehicle because of the destruction or whatever that has happened during that time, right? Yeah, I would, Howie. I'm just reading the chat real quick before I get into that. But like, remembering that you might not have access to that, right? There is stories like this, real stories out there from real people. It might be a reenactment when you see it, obviously in video, right? But like, you know, I mean, there is this story out there. You can actually see a reenactment of it, right? Like, it's like, and basically, basically what happened was during a routine kind of trip or whatever, right? Someone with their ATV flipped their ATV and it pinned them to the ground. They can't lift that because they don't have the full the angle to lift that out, and they're alone. And it's an ATV with supplies on it. So imagine that. Imagine that, right? Imagine that. You got supplies near, closer to you than the length of your vehicle, let's just say, right? However, because you don't have access to it, you can't get to that quote unquote life saving equipment. You might as well be on Mars. You might as well be on the moon, right? Because you don't have access to it, right? Because what happened was that it pinned them on the their stomach, their chest to the ground, or their hip to the ground, right? So their back is facing up, like in a crawl position or whatever, right? They have no access to this life-saving gear that they had to secure on their ATV with chains, right? So it didn't come loose yet. They can see it. They know what's inside. They know we can help them, but they cannot access it. So it might as well be on their planet, right? Off the Earth for what they would consider, right? And the moral, what I'm saying about this is sometimes it's the things that you have on you that are important, right? Not just the physical stuff, obviously, right? some sort of EDC, whatever, pocket carry, whatever you have on you, whatever, you want to go bracelets, you know, whistle around your neck, whatever. Maybe you got shoelace ferrocene rods or whatever. Right? You've replaced all your shoelaces with like paracord or whatever, some sort of strong cordage or whatever, right? Something like that. Maybe something else, right, or whatever, right? You know, yeah, that it's those things that are your first line of defense, right? Because the reason I'm saying this is because you know some of these places down in Indonesia, Colombia. Sorry, I'm thinking of the other place that just happened with the seismic activity, right? A lot of this footage I've been seeing, right? There's a lot of quote unquote dust in the air because things are falling and creating a plume of dust, right? You know, because the way that it happened, right? You know, stuff like that. Wouldn't it be nice to know that you have a bottle of water in your hand right away? Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, or you have something on you right away that could potentially help, maybe not necessarily solve problems, but give you options to mitigate or assist in the problem solving aspect, right? You know what I mean? So if you had some water and someone came to you and they're just covered with dust, you can use some of it if you wanted to, right? If you wanted to, or something like that. A little bit to kind of for their eyes, nose, mouth area, that kind of stuff, right? And stuff like that. Maybe and stuff like that. Maybe you have some other stuff with you, right? That could assist you or whatever, right? It could be a whistle that you have on your keys that's in your pocket, or that whistle that you decide to keep on your neck. You decide to EDC it, everyday carry it, alright? You didn't know when you would use it, but, something like that could be useful, right? Draw attention, right? And stuff like that, right? Because I can imagine that not just that the camera doesn't do it justice, but the sounds, right? Like, because people are recording this on their phones, right? I mean, it's like the difference between hearing like fireworks, for example, or something similar to that of a sound, or sirens over a phone or over video compared to in real life, right? There's a difference, right? So, like, I imagine that, you know, maybe it sounds like a train coming. I don't know, as they say. Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. Right, you want conserve your energy, conserve that your expenditure of that energy and the moisture you have in you, right? The best that you can with what you got, right? At that time, right? I mean, obviously the situation, it can be from various situations or scenarios, but like ultimately you gotta make that choice, right? And realize that kind of stuff, whatever it is, right? You know, whether it be from exposure, dehydration, or whatever, right? You go a lot longer without food, right? But usually exposure, you know, severe injuries and dehydration will probably get to you first, right? Most likely, right? And stuff like that. Stuff like that. You know, because this is you know there was this one time. I mean, I'm not going to go into details on the story, but something happened to me 10 years ago. I never mentioned it on the channel right during that time, back in 2017. Yeah, well, 9 years ago. Sorry, it's 2026. Right, 2017, right? I didn't mention it during that time, but let's just say something happened to me like, don't worry, I'm all good, alright? Nothing permanent or whatever, right? But it was kind of not sketchy, but dicey and kind of, at that time, it seemed very precarious at that time, right? For what it was, right? Obviously, in retrospect, it's not, but compared to other things. But one thing I realized that and there was a reason why I'm mentioning this because it reminds me of it. Because something happened, right? I went somewhere just to go get something, right? Literally down the street, right? Literally down the street, right? And yeah, I had my quote unquote get home bag, right? Or things I had, right? Because I was kind of staying over at a friend's place. I went to go get something at the store real quick for them or whatever. I don't remember, but something happened. I would just say, you know what really helped me during that time was what I had on me, aka EDC everyday carry, right? That was my first line of defense, right? It helped me to reduce, let's just say, well, XYZ until I could get back to quote unquote the house, right? Where my bag was, right? Where I actually had quote unquote more substantial supplies to use, right? Like, this is a very individual thing, but at the time I was just like, when that happened, right? I was just like, I was very extremely grateful that at least I planned something in advance, right? I didn't I didn't specifically plan for this scenario, but it kind of fell in. The blocks fell into place, and it's kind of happened, right? You know, things happen, right? I was just like, I'm like, I ended up still going to the store and coming back. Like, my friends were like, they were like, "What the hell?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, and, yeah, things happen." I mean, and it was squared away. Everything's good now, right? You know, well, we'll just say that was kind of dicey. That was kind of dicey for what it was, right? Even though looking back at it 9 years later, I'm just like, man, that was kind of dicey. I was very lucky. Could have been, let's just say it could have been more serious, right? Let's just say it's just like metaphorically speaking, it's just a flesh wound, right? Let's just say that, right? But even that showed me a lot, right? It showed me that, these EDC items, this pocket dump that people do or whatever, right? Yeah, yeah, some of them do it for show or whatever, right? But sometimes it's really it is because it is your first line of defense, your first option, right? Because that might be the only thing you have on you at that moment, on hand, right? Before you do that quote unquote zone of assessment outwards, right? You see what's on you, right? What do you have on you that can supplies, gear, and of course knowledge and experience that can help you at that moment? Then you kind of broaden your uh, uh, scope out, right? Things on hand that are like 5 feet away or whatever, right? And stuff like that. Because I could just imagine, like, I even saw this one thing, right? And I actually left a comment. I don't usually leave comments on those type of videos because, or whatever, but I just kind of there's this video out there where I think it's like a dad, a mom, maybe a brother-in-law or whatever, and their son, right? And I think this was in Colombia. There is footage out there about this. Their home was kind of shaking extremely bad, right? And mom's like, get out, right? It's a seismic activity, It's a quake. It's the big one, whatever you want to call it, right? And the dad and the older gentleman, I don't know, brother-in-law, could be uncle, I don't know. Wait, dad, I don't know. Grandfather, I don't know. Anyways, because the mom was recording, right? I was looking at this footage, right? I was just like, I'm not saying they did anything wrong or whatever, right? But there was one thing that caught my eye. that their son, because the two are older males, right? They had flip flop sandals on, right? I don't know about the mom in that scene because obviously she's recording. I never saw her feet, as far as I know, right? But their son, because they're quote unquote evacuating from the building, right? I mean, yeah, you want to do that during a seismic activity, right? Because obviously you don't want to be in a building that's unsafe and shaking like crazy, right? Yeah, right. But when he left the building, and I'm saying there wasn't enough time or whatever, but he did not have footwear on, bare feet. Think about it. Seismic activity going around, right? There could be broken glass, particles of rocks and or whatever, right? Or the more serious glass thing, right? And you're in bare feet, and you have to be outside, and you gotta move around because you gotta watch out for things, right? And I kind of mentioned, I mean, I'm paraphrasing what I said. I mean, like having proper footwear or some sort of footwear by the exit, right? Right. I'm not saying go back in the house or whatever to grab that, right? But what I'm saying is like, you know, having footwear, proper shoes, dress wear, footwear on your exits, wherever it is, right? Front door, back door, whatever, patio, side door, whatever is important, right? Not just for the convenience of our everyday thing, but during an emergency, like in this video that I'm describing, you can grab that on the way out, right? And you would have something on your feet right away. So you wouldn't have to worry about stepping on glass with bare feet because you have footwear on, even if it is just sandals to start with, right? If not shoes, right? Obviously, I'm not expecting everyone just to have like steel toe shoes and this or whatever, right? But at least some shoes to start with, right? Because like I don't know if they were able to get back in the building or whatever, right? But if it was worse, and you have to flee more or run, it would be at least be a little bit easier for modern day people to have footwear ready, right? Like I think, because I've seen other examples of this where in the preparedness community they're like about the footwear, right? I was like, that's the first thing I noticed, right? I mean, I don't know how hot it was there, but he was walking on like dark pavement, right? The pavement's probably hot too, right? I don't know the temperature that was there at the moment, right? At that time, right? It could have been 30 Celsius, 86 Fahrenheit, 90s. I have no idea. I would have to check, right? But I mean, like, because if you don't have access to transportation, like a vehicle, bike, something like that, well, you're gonna have to go old school. The transportation that's with you all the time, your feet, right? And if your feet have issues with the, the tires, aka your sole, your feet, you're walking slower, you're injured, and all that stuff, right? So when I was thinking about that, I'm like, I just had to write something, right? I just had to kind of add that in, right? Like I'm not saying like bailing out or whatever was the worst call or whatever. I'm just saying, you know, just having shoes on that exit would have been really, really convenient, right? Something like you could just grab, even if it's an older pair, right? Something you don't usually wear, right? Like I know some people out there in the garden community, right? They have their quote unquote work shoes or work boots that they wear in the garden, right? Something a little bit older, right? Even something like that would have been useful, right? Because at least you got something on your feet right away, for example, right? So if you couldn't get back in the building or whatever, or it became worse, you got something on you versus trying to scrape that off from the environment or quote even improvising something like that. you know, like yeah, you probably improvise something at least to maintain something, but I mean it's not to be the same because you're not, you know, yeah, you probably can make something, maybe some cardboard, some duct tape or whatever, but it's not to be or improvise sandals to some degree, but it's not to be the same as having footwear that's size to you because it's actually the footwear you usually or have worn or broken in already, if that makes any sense. Yeah? Here you go, just go back to my chatter. Just kind of, just kind of, I'm just kind of, apparently how he's eating a peach. Always something to be careful about. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You care about it? Yeah, yeah, something like that at least to start with, right? You know? But that way you know it's kind of clean and kind of sterile or clean. At least more than just like some random shirt material, right? If the shirt's on your back, it's the only thing you got. Well, that's the only thing you got, right? Still better than bleeding out, but kind of thinking ahead. Yeah, maybe I'll bring something with me, right? Something clean. What's that? That's not my shirt off my back, right? Oh wow, sweet, sweet, Howie. Pun intended. Yeah. Just saying. Let's see. So when you go well up to your family member asks why you're carrying a hatchet and several pocket knives and a multi-tool and some other things, right? And you say to them, 35K people, yeah, 35,000 people go missing, yeah, yeah. Or something happens, right? Yeah, exactly, right? You know? Because when you have experience in it, knowledge of it, skills to back up that, and the gear itself, right? Well, you have more options during the quote unquote emergency situation, right? And I'm air quoting that a bit, but like because unfortunately, you know, you know, day to day things are kind of generally the same for most people, right? You do this, you go to the flea market, you go to the farmer's market, something like that, you go to work or whatever, right? Generally, that's how it is, right? 90% of the time. However, that's not 100% of the time. And that rare chance that, you know, Mother Nature's gonna throw something out there, or unfortunately, someone else might throw a monkey wrench in the mix on your day, and it changes things, right? It dramatically changes your day, right? It could be as serious as a fire, flooding. Well, in this case, in this example, I've been talking about earthquake, right? You know, and the thing is, I want to reintegrate it is that these two places that have had earthquakes in the last little bit, well, literally within the last few days, right? It's not uncommon for those areas, right? So what I'm saying is like in this example, right? Hopefully after the fact, hopefully that quote unquote son, hopefully their mom kind of mentioned, hey, you should have grabbed some footwear on the way out, right? In retrospect, right? I don't know, because obviously I couldn't find any footage afterwards about it, right? Maybe you got some footwear, maybe in between you managed to sneak in real quick, grab something off the landing or out the back out the back door, right? Before something more aftershocks, right? I don't know, right? But something like that. Because I'm trying to, I don't, yeah, because I think the last one they had was kind of like what 10 years ago or whatever, right? If I remember right. I'm trying to remember right. I've been watching a lot of videos, but I was just like, you gotta remind people. It's like, you know, the certain reasons for having things staged, ready, and met. It's just so when said situation eventually statistically happens, right? You're a little bit more prepared for it because you gave it a little bit more forethought, right? I'm not saying some whole doomsday prepper or whatever, right? But like the real world, the real things that are really happening to people right now. The real things, right? You know, not just just being able to put food on the table, right? Inflation, right? But these natural things that are happening too, through fire, water, well, flooding, I should say, but well, wind could be involved too, right? And then these seismic activities, right? I mean, there was what wasn't there a typhoon that happened on the Asian side that I've heard of, on the along some of those Asian countries and places, right? And some desert stuff, right? Right? You know, stuff like that. It's just something to keep in mind, right? I mean, for people in the U.S., right? You know, because there hasn't been much hurricane activity, right? Compared to previous years, right? But I'm not. It could be developing right now, right? To be ready for it, right? Whatever it is. It's just like me here in Canada, right? Like I gotta prepare for winter here. Yeah, I know I'm talking winter when it's friggin' August, but like, like that's like me not being prepared for that, right? And like going through frostbite and or whatever unnecessarily, right? Like I've experienced it, and it kind of sucks, and it kind of really bites, right? And really hurts when it falls out. But you know, I've experienced it, and then I realized, like that whole saying, like once bitten, twice shy, right? Or something along the lines of that, right? Because sometimes, a lot of the time, in the preparedness community, there is this kind of trigger or something that changes you, right? Makes you like, yeah, I don't want to go for that again. I don't want to go for that heartache again. I don't want to go through that stress anymore, right? So, you know, even for me right now, I'm just like thinking, like, starting to think ahead like that. It's just like for the next time, right? You know, you know, that once in a lifetime storm, or once in a lifetime, or once in 100 years, 126 years, whatever, right? Kind of thing, right? You know, it may come back sooner than you think, right? Or something similar to it, right? And learning from the past experience, past heartaches, past stress that not just myself, but there are people that go through during these events, right? It's just like it makes you, want to be more prepared, right? And stuff like the best that you can with the resources that you have, right, at your disposal, right? Regardless if you live in an apartment, a home, I don't know, duplex, condo, whatever, or on top of a skyscraper, I don't know, whatever, right? Stuff like that, right? Because, you know, to be ready, right, is like, it all, it all starts from within, right? Your ability to change, right? Adapt to the situation. And it's a little bit easier when you got some experience, some skills, experience, some knowledge, and of course, some gear to help that along, right? You know what I mean? You know, you might have the skill, the knowledge, the experience. Oh, I bushcraft some footwear before, Ray. That's all great, right? Maybe even useful to a certain degree, right? But are you really don't bushcraft, quote unquote, sandals when there's a seismic activity in your area? Probably not, because you don't have enough time, right? You don't have enough time to doing it, right? I mean, look, go try making improvised sandals or footwear with just something right now, right? How long is that gonna take you, right? Right? It could be as fast as a couple minutes if it's just kind of down and dirty, rudimentary, right? But 2 or 3 minutes, that's quite a long time in in a seismic activity, right? Because, you know, basically you're trying to stand up, right? Keep still or and watch out for things, right? You don't have time. You don't have time to be like, sorry guys, hold on. I gotta grab this duct tape, some wood here, and make some improvised saddles because I was a dumbass and I should have left some shoes on, at least like on the outside patio or on the deck or on my way. Grab some on the way out, right? You know, because like, yeah, you can improvise that to a certain degree, but you need materials, right? But you don't have the materials close by or whatever. Even if, even if you had duct tape, cargo tape, right? I mean, like, you would need something for a base and stuff like that. Could you improvise something fast enough? I don't know, but because you're doing that, you're diverting your energy and your attention away. So instead of looking for hazards like falling glass or whatever, right? A pole or whatever, right? Or a tree or whatever, right? You're trying to make sandals, right? Or forcing someone else that's in your group, family member, to watch out, right? So, because the more eyes that are out there kind of looking, you might be able to not prevent, but at least foresee some danger and be like, yeah, let's get out of here, right? Versus, hold on, I gotta put another roll, another, some more tape on my sandals that I'm trying to make here, right? You know, just saying. Let me go back to my chat here real quick. Yes, feed the microbes with a CR in it. Yes, Howie. Yes, yes. Oh, that's good. That's good, Howie. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. You know what I mean. Take care, Howie. I know he already slipped out, but that's all good. That's all good. Right? That's all good. So, yeah, I mean, this is why, I wasn't necessarily planning to do a preparedness stream, but however, I did want to mention, like I said, these seismic activities that are going down right now, and also some of these wild forest fires and stuff like that that are impacting a lot of people, right? And stuff like, and of course, the water or flooding or whatever are impacting people right now, right? You might you might not know someone directly. You might not even know someone in the a friend of a friend, but you might know a friend of a friend of yours, or they're a friend of a friend that their mom, their parents, or relatives went through something like that. All right, like, you know, this is why I try to reach out to people at times, right? You know, like, like, however long ago, I forget how long. The thing that happened in Vegas, right, a while back, right, with all that stuff, right? I reached out to someone right away. I didn't assume that they were there at that location or not, but I reached out to them, right? Because I knew they lived in within that area, right? Even if they weren't in this emergency situation at that time for those people, right? They might have known someone or someone that attended this, right? So that's why I reach out at times, right? Because, like, it's a small world, right? you know, and people go to places, you know. Eventually, in time, especially with social media, also with the internet and stuff like websites and all that stuff, we kind of have some people out there that we kind of know in different parts of the world, let's just say it, right? Regardless where it is. Regardless of the country or continent or which side of the hemisphere it is on, right? You may know someone, right? So this is why I reach out, right? and stuff like that. Even even during the seismic activity over in the Philippines, I reached out to someone too. I did reach out to someone. All right. I didn't I didn't assume they probably don't know anyone there, right? I asked, right? Not in terms of like probing or whatever, right? Or starting a preparedness talk or about it. No, I wanted to just ask because I wasn't sure. I figured I would ask, right? And stuff like that. And of course, show that I care, right? Because, like, you know, because it could be one of those things where, oh, they actually did know someone, right? And then, yeah, and kind of relate to it and be like, yeah, you know, and stuff like that, and kind of metaphorically feel their pain, right? Feel how it is in their shoes or whatever, right? Because sometimes the best lessons in life are the ones that you experience for real, right? Even on a small scale or on a minor scale, right? It really shows how vulnerable that you could be at times, right? You know, you know, it makes you want to be like, yeah, let's not just run out the door without shoes next time, right? Something like that, or something along the lines of that, right? Maybe I'll kind of keep these shoes on standby, right? Let's just leave my shoes in the basement or whatever, right? At least have some flip flops or at least something to start with, right? You know what I mean? You know, you know what I mean? Because at least even if you, I mean, yeah, it's probably flip flops are probably not as good as shoes in terms of running or whatever, right? And movement speed, but you know, hey, I can wrap some duct tape around it or whatever, and kind of get a little bit more, right? Using some gear that may be nearby or on you, or relatively speaking, right? I mean, at least it's a start, right? Because at least if you had to improvise footwear, right? At least you have a base to start with. You're not totally recreating it from scratch. Like, I think some people forget that recreating something from scratch takes a lot longer than you realize, right? You know, it's not as it's not always as fast as it is in the movies, in the TV shows out there, right? Actually, the prime example is probably MacGyver, right? You know, when you see these episodes, no matter if it's the new or the newer one that was released, which was so, or the older one with Richard Dean Anderson, right? You know, no, they slim down the time that it actually takes to do these things, right? Or yes, plenty of time. You may not always have plenty of time to create something, right? Or to recreate something because you don't have it, right? So therefore, try to have it ready in advance so you don't have to, right? You may want to learn about it, try it out just to see, time yourself and be like, oh yeah, see, that's right. It took me 5 minutes to make the sandals, and I was rushing, and I wasn't even in a stressful situation. I wasn't even in a serious situation, right? Just imagine trying to do that while you're stressed out, people yelling at you, or things happening around you, around your environment, your immediate area, and you'd be like, change your mind about it, right? You know, unfortunately, I could say this now. Yes, it's already August, but unfortunately, it looks like for me, I won't have time to go camping this season, this 2026 season. But what I will say is, earlier in my adventures of camping, right, I've had some dicey situations, right, where where I've had to bail due to weather, right? I mean, I guess I can chime in with them, but I mean, I had to bail due to weather, right? And let's just say, in the last two times I've had to do that, especially the last time, right? Because I was way too complacent about like my setup. All right, like I admit this, right? We're way too sloppy off of a camp. Didn't tie down things. I should have been more prepared. I should have anchored things better below up, right? Well, we'll just say my deployment was not as fast as I would like at that time. Basically, I'm scrambling. It felt like that, alright? I mean, since then, if I go back camping, I'm always like, always gotta have things ready, right? Yeah, you know, stuff like that for what it is, right? So, like, I'm ready to go if necessary, right? Because weather can change and all that stuff, or whatever happens, right? You know, because this is the thing, right? It was a freak storm, and this wind, like nowhere to lie, was like crazy. I mean, like it was a strong gale. I'm trying to remember because it's been a while, but like it could have been on the Beaufort wind scale, like at a 6 or 7, maybe even at an 8, right? Because this camping location, one of them, anyways, it's by open water, right? So technically, it's more vulnerable to wind compared to deeper in the tree line or whatever, right? Like, I because that's the first time in that. I mean, I've been camping in this area before, right? I've never experienced wind speeds that freaking strong. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, here's a quick gust, right? It was like a sustained wind, which is even worse, right? And remember, hurricane strength winds are measured from sustained winds, not gust, right? So I'm talking about something I thought it was just a make gust, you know, it'll blow over or whatever. No, it was actually strong, like a gale, right? That's pretty high. That's like just below hurricane strength on the scale, right? That's like, let's say 7, 8, like a or full. Yeah, because I think full gale is at 9. Uh, Gale force wind starts at that 7, I think 6 or 7 on that scale, right? And I was kind of seeing some strong winds, right? You know, and stuff like that. Like, nowhere to lie, I saw like a pop-up tent, a smaller tent, do a 360 in the air. Like that's how. That's think about that. You see it. You're camping with other people, other campers. You know, maybe recreational, maybe it's a campsite, maybe it's an event or whatever. You see a tent do a 360 in the air and no one threw it, and you know it's from wind, and then you know it's windy. Yeah, you know it's dicey, right? Because it's just like the amount of energy needed just to do that, right? And to make it actually do that in the air. It's doing a 360 in the air. It's not just like a tumbleweed blowing down, blowing along the ground and rolling on the ground. It's in the air doing that. So it has to have loft, lift, like a kite or a wing or whatever, or right. And to enough of a gust or a sustained wind to actually do that, right? I was just like, that was so dicey, right? You know, like when I was during that time, like I'm not saying like it was extremely destructive, but like it was one of those things like there was other campers, right? Like we weren't the only ones with issues in terms of like damages, right? From tents or whatever, right? I'm not saying like vehicles got damaged or whatever, right? Or RVs that got damaged. It wasn't like that, but it's the tents, right? Because they're less they're more they're more vulnerable to the wind compared to other structures, right? But I was seeing things like even metal frame, certain things were kind of bending under the pressure, right? I'm talking about like tent poles and stuff like that, right? I'm not talking about vehicles or RVs because they're a little bit more heavier. They were able to handle that kind of wind speed, right? But I was just like, I'm like, holy cow, man! Right? I really put it in perspective, right? Like,
Even just thinking about it right now. What's up, Bob? How's it going, Bob? Yeah, I know. I'm just talking about something, Bob. I don't know how long you've been here, but I'm kind of mentioning some stories here, especially with everything that's been going down, right? Right, right. If it's not just right, think about it. Like in the last couple weeks, let's just say 6 weeks, right? Right. Well, there's a hurricane. You know that earthquake that happened in the Philippines. That earthquake that happened this week in Colombia, right? And there's another earthquake that apparently happened earlier during the day down in the southern hemisphere, right? like, like it's pretty dicey, right? Like I've never experienced one, and hopefully I won't. But I mean, like I'm trying to remember certain things, right? Just in case I'm in along the Pacific Rim of Fire, right? Because like other people, including yourself, Bob, people travel, you know, and that's the thing about one of those things like earthquakes, right? You don't get much warning. I mean, you may get an alert warning on your device, your smartphone or whatever, right? Because it can if there's a sensor for it, right? It will trigger it. And it'll send it at the speed of light, which is faster than the P wave, I think, or is it the S wave that comes first, right? The sound wave, the seismic wave, right? So you may get 10 seconds warning to do something, right? Hey, 10 seconds is better than no warning, right? At least for something like that, right? But I was just like, just kind of remembering my own experiences with earth things, not necessarily seismic activity, but like with winds and stuff like that, right? I mean, like, or people tell me stories, and I'm always interested to hear these stories, especially if it's a real account or a real, they really went through it, right? And they're not saying from a friend of mine, right? Where, it's kind of hearsay, but they personally went through something, right? And I always listen to these because they're sharing their story, and not only that, their experience of it, right? And it makes me remember about the reasoning for the preparedness parts, right? The reasoning for certain things, the reasoning for staging a go back, the reasoning for staging shoes on your back step or your front step or whatever, back patio, back step or whatever, so they're ready to go, because it may be one of those things you gotta dash out the door real fast, right? And I'm not talking about like DoorDash here. I'm talking about like actually really dashing out, right? You know. So this is one of those things that I've been realizing more and more, right? My reasonings for this, right? It's becoming more and more apparent. Reasonings, right? To keep going, right? You know, and kind of think about this more than just during September, right? During natural, I guess I'll say National Preparedness Month, right? For September, right? Because obviously that's technically coming within a couple of weeks now from now, right? And by kind of thinking about it, kind of on and off, right? The rest that are 11 months of the year, that are 336, 300. Wait, actually, let's see, 30 days, 130, 335 days a year. I'm thinking about it too, right? Not saying I'm thinking about it all the time, but it's just one of those, it's kind of, it's on the back burner, right? You realize it's there, but you don't leave it unattended, right? Because you don't want to get burnt, metaphorically burnt from it, right? And stuff like that. So that's why I'm keeping that in mind. So, because I know it's important for what it is, because, yeah, it just is. It just is, right? I mean, Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, I could show this. I guess it's just out. I guess it's just outside. Not even joking. Oh, seriously. Let's see. Look, that's real water right there. All right. Just in case. Oh, I shouldn't be doing that. I just realized I should be. I just realized why I'm doing. I'm like, let me point with the. Let me just use the pinky. That's probably better, right? I mean, yeah. Reasons for staging certain things, right? Even as simple as water, right? Water is life. When you have water, you have options. You got options to wash dust out of your eye, wash your face, something to drink with, something to cool down with, right? You know, something to wash a wound or a cut with or whatever, right? Something that's clean like water, right? Versus trying to improvise that. Oh, wait, there is no replacement. You can't improvise water. You can only improvise ways of making it clean or pulling it from the ground, air, or whatever, right? Or distilling it, right? But there's no replacement or alternative for water, for the most part, right? For the most part, right? For the most part. So that's something I keep in mind, right? You know, among some other things, right? Hey, I got some stuff out here with me right now, so stuff like that. You know, let's see what I got here. I gotta reorganize this too. While I'm at it. Well, I'm not gonna do it right now, but alright. Wow. I won't show this because I'll show that in a different video later on. But anyway, you know, like right here, I got some like kind of I'm gonna say heavy duty, but at least more durable kind of gloves, right? We're working with certain things, right? To protect my hands, right? Stuff like that. That way, you know, if I gotta pick up something or whatever, pokey or whatever, or, you know, kind of pokey or whatever, right? At least I can protect my hands, right? But that way I don't get slivers in my hands or cut up my hands, right? I can, don't get me wrong, I've gardened without gardening gloves before, right? But then there's sometimes I'm just like, yeah, maybe I want to use them this time around. Because it could be like a pokey thing, you know what I mean? Or whatever, right? Or, yeah, maybe I don't want to brush my hand against that plant. That kind of thing, right? So, something I want to keep in mind for what it is. As I kind of pull something out here. Alright? You know what? Maybe I'll pull something out here. As I'll mention something else here while I'm doing this. Alright. Something I will pull out here. Something I briefly showed earlier in the year, right? Because it'll kind of, I'll piggyback on on something else here. Is, you know, one quote unquote bigger channels out there, quote unquote, right? Depending on how much you think size matters. Oh yeah. Hey CR, that was a great way to introduce that. Yeah, that was great. I know. That was a great way to introduce that kind of thing right there, right? You're probably like, yeah. That was a great way to introduce that. Yeah. I really thought I did it. Oh, didn't I? Yeah, you really did, CR. You really did. Whew. Before I get into that, I'm just gonna take a look outside here. Huh. Actually, I see the stars, actually. I mean, honestly, I can't show you guys because it's way too dim.
and I don't have the exposure on my phone and that really high ISO setting to show it, but yeah, I can see the stars, right? Or at least some of them, right? Obviously, I'd be able to see more if there wasn't so much light pollution, but at least I could see some of it, you know? Kind of see the Big Dipper and all that stuff, see the North Star, Polaris, and all that stuff, right? What it is. I'm always trying to remember. I'm always trying to remember. Can I actually see it? Because it is important too, right? That kind of thing in terms of knowing that kind of stuff, right? That old school navigation, right? Before GPS, even before compasses, right? Yeah, right. This star formation's what, millions of years old, or at least it won't change for another million years or whatever. So, we'll be like this for a while, right? So, always a good indication. Yeah, because it is. We must be in a new moon cycle. Because it's actually quite dark out. There's no moon out, right? Yeah, we must be in a new moon cycle. Because actually, I was outside yesterday too last night, so I noticed it too. I'm like, oh yeah, we are in a new moon cycle right now. So I can't even show you the moon because we're in a new moon cycle right now, right? So, give me 1 second. All right, I'm back. So yeah, I mean, hold on a sec. So yeah, one of these major channels dropped by and left me a comment on one of my videos, on one of my a specific video, which actually relates to one of the last videos I saw from them, right? Because they were kind of talking about like, I'm trying to remember the title. You you're not the same as you were when you were 25, right? Right? And they left me a reply to my comment, right? A couple of days after, right? And then I just realized it, right? Because they were talking about conditioning, right? Being able to, well, to carry stuff on your back or whatever, right? And they actually dropped by on my get home bag video that I just shot earlier in the year. It was technically in April, but I posted it, scheduled it for May of this year, right? Well, I was like, it's out now, right? They left me a short comment, right? But when I could tell that they kind of replied to me in terms of my comment, came out and watched the video, right? And that's the funny thing. They would have to look back or search for it, right? Because it's not my recent video. It's not just a couple days or a couple weeks, but it's a couple months old, right? So like, I could tell, right? You know what I mean? It's not like, oh hey, I came in by to watch your last video, right? Anyone can come by and see someone's last video so fast, right? Because usually it's the top of the list, right? Unless you're searching for it directly or whatever, you have to scroll down on someone's video list or whatever, right? It's not like, oh, here it is, I'm rehashing it as a post a couple months later, no. And I didn't say anything about me having a video about it on my comment, right? So they had no idea. So they had to physically look for it, right? You know what I mean? I don't know how much they watched of it, and the comment's very short, but I do appreciate that. Right? I haven't replied back to them yet because it actually came in before I started the stream. I'm just like, oh, that was very nice of them, right? So I'll probably reply back to them after, right? But I was just like thinking to myself, I was like, you know, that was another reason why I decided to do this type of stream instead, right? Hold on a sec. I don't know how much longer I'll go. I don't know. I'll probably go to the top of the hour or the 2 hour mark at least. But probably maybe longer than that. Maybe not. Probably not. For some reason, I get an influx of people, but it's just the way it is. It's a late night stream on a Friday night for me. Saying my piece, saying things that I kind of hold back at times on side chats, right? And stuff like that, or briefly say, right, and stuff like that. Let's see here. Stick something out. Hold on a sec, people. So yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, I thought I noticed something. I'm like, nope, no, no, oh. Just coincidence, just seeing things, maintaining my spatial awareness, just in case, because it is dark outside. All right, I got a flashlight, not directly on me, but pretty close by, within like 5 feet, so I can go grab it or whatever. And technically, I am at home, so one of my solar lights will probably pop up if something happened, but the reasoning, like I didn't really go into it so much in that video, in this, where I was quote unquote making my way home, and you know, officially I will say that I actually really did that, by the way. you know, like I really, really did that, right? you know, I didn't just walk around the block and shot a little footage right now. It's not quite like that. That's why a lot of the footage is different, right? Because originally when I did that video, was recording it, right? That's like a 3 hour trip, give or take, right? I had over 60 minutes of footage. I just condensed it down to 10. Did some voiceovers, kind of blended some the footage together. So it's not all in chronological order, but it's the quote unquote the trip, the path, the trip, the adventure, the path I took on it, right? To illustrate the point of, looking around, seeing around, and stuff like that, noticing things and stuff like that, right? And stuff like that. Because, like, that kind of experience showed me a lot, too, right? And the thing is, that's not the first time I did that, technically, in terms of duration and for distance, right? The only difference is that I had substantially more weight on me, right? So wear and tear, and I did notice with my foot, because I have this issue with my foot, especially on my right side, right? It's actually on the base of my foot, and sometimes it happens if I sleep in a certain angle or whatever, right? But usually it subsides, right? Usually it subsides. Very rarely do I. Rarely can't walk it off. Let's just say, right? So, but this is the reason why you did not see the content is because these type of go bags emergency kits, right? They were supposed to be designed, obviously, if you DIY it or make your own specifically, right? But they're generally designed for the person that's using it, right? So the like, I don't even know if I said it. I might have said it. I don't know, but yeah, obviously there'd be water and something like that on it, right? Some sort of supplies, right? Those that 80/20, the common denominator of stuff, right? But it could vary, right? Depending, right? I did this during late spring, early summer. Well, actually, late spring. No, early spring. What am I saying? Technically, I keep forgetting there was actually snow on the ground when I did that. Right? Not a lot, because it was like 50 Fahrenheit and 10 Celsius, so it was melting quite quickly. But right, that was like the most ideal time to do it, right? Because it wasn't in extreme cold and it wasn't in extreme heat, right? So, like I said in this comment, said to this bigger channel because they were talking about something similar to this, right? It gave me a baseline, another baseline, another, what's the word? An indicator, yeah, baseline for this, right? Where I can be like, okay, I did this before at least, right? As long as I'm doing something similar, I should be able to do it, providing I'm in that same condition, right? Same, fresh. I'm still fresh, right? Obviously, if I'm injured or more tired, it'd be different, right? But I was just like, it gave me a good indication about it, right? Baseline for it, marker, uh, something I could plot on a graph kind of deal, right? Some quantitative measurement of it, right? Where I can measure it as a whole, right? And understand why I'm doing this, right? And I was just like, because, like, I didn't mention this because obviously this was after I already, like, kind of came back in the area, right? But I wanted to talk to some people because I was just walking by their place too, and I saw them and I ran into them, right? And I told them, they're like, "Hey, CR, yeah, what's up, man? Hey, how's it going, right?" And all that, the greetings, right? I was just, and they're like, "Hey, CR, why you got a bag on you?" Because obviously you're gonna notice that, right? Your silhouette's gonna give you away on that, right? I'm not hiding that on me, right? Come on, let's face it, right? No matter how gray man I look or didn't look, right? That's a standout still because it's a noticeable thing, right? You notice what people are wearing or whatever, right? Stuff like that. I was just like, oh, I just walked back 10 kilometers. Or for you guys in the US, 6.2 miles, right? Give or take. Because I checked it after I actually checked it before I left. I was on Google Maps. I was just like, yep, that's the distance from where I left back home, right? And I kind of knew how long it would take and all that stuff in my route too, right? But they're like, wow, right? Right? You know. And I talked to someone else I know in the area, right? They're a little bit older than me. They're probably in 20 years older than me, right? They're saying to me, they're like, "Hey, CR, man, I can't believe you did that, right?" You know. And then they were saying to me, they're like, "Oh, I probably, they were saying, hey, CR, I probably can't. Hold on a sec." So they were saying they were saying to me like, "Oh, CR, I probably couldn't do that at my age now, right?" And then it remind when I was writing this comment to this bigger channel about this video on a similar thing, right? It reminded me of it because when I was writing this comment, I was remembering the experiences of the past, right? While I was writing this, right? Kind of writing it from the heart, from experience, right? I was just like, you know, saying that, and I was just like, yeah, right. So the whole thing about baseline, and stuff like that, knowing your limits, right, or your upper limits of certain things, right, how much you can push, right. Because like I said, it was not the first time I did a really long walk, right. The only difference is the last time I did this back earlier in the year, I had substantially more weight on me. I actually had to bring stuff home. So, literally, my get home bag actually had stuff in it, right? You know, because I voiced over some of the parts right after, right after I got home, and just like originally when I left, right, I was just like kind of like, oh, there's like maybe 13, 14 pounds on me, right? I kind of guesstimated, but I was like, I was kind of off by a couple pounds. Where I'm just like, yeah, it wasn't 13, 14 pounds. It's actually 17, right? And you're like, wow, so you did that? And I'm like, yeah, right? Because I had to take some stuff back. And my friend kind of gave me a few things and I had to take it home, right? You know? And like I said in that video, I didn't have to quote unquote walk home. I chose to, right? As a challenge. And, to make content too. But as a challenge too, right? And an excuse to make content, right? So I did plan it even before I left home to go to their place. I was already planning this, right? I was already planning this, right? I just didn't know which day I was gonna do it on, but I was just like, yeah, yeah. I figured this is gonna be the day, right? Like literally, I was in a live stream, and then prepared to stream during that before I left. I was like, and actually, that's the reason why I actually had to leave that stream early because I was walking back home, right? So things like that I was doing, right? But even before that, I did, and I've shown this as a video, short clips of it because it was during winter, right? Similar distance, similar time frame in terms of the time it took, but I did that in I think it was like minus 17 Celsius, 0 Fahrenheit, right? Right. But at that time, I had way less weight on me, right? I only had what I would call a minimalistic type of get home bag, right? You know? So I was just like, even before that video that I showed, right? There's this air trip which I did have footage. It's where I decided to scrap it, and I never did show it. So you guys don't have to take my word for it on this, but I do have people that could what's the word I'm looking for? Collaborate my statement on it. Yeah, right. Where they would be like, yeah, right, yeah, he did it because he was with us, right? But I made a longer trip, right? Like, I don't. It was way longer. Like, it was almost 4 or 5 hour walk, right? With elevation change, right? But one of the more serious lessons I learned from that trip, because I kind of pushed a little too hard at the end there. I was just like, oh, I'm still good. I pushed too hard. All right. And I felt that like literally like 20, 30, 45 minutes after that, and I pushed too hard. And remember when I said about my foot, right? My right foot? I felt that. I was like, yeah, I pushed way too hard at the end there, right? Got too cocky, right? And it's like I pushed too hard, right? That's why earlier this year when I kind of made, a 10 kilometer, 6.2 mile trip, walk back, I'm like, yeah, I like that other time where I pushed really hard at the end, pushed too hard at times. I'm gonna pace myself and try not to get injured, right? Yeah, don't get me wrong, there's a little tenderness, a little soreness in my foot, my shoulder for a little bit, right? But basically, I just slept it off, right? But the next morning after I slept, I was good again. I was kind of fresh again, right? Kind of deal, right? Unlike that other time where I made a 4 or 5 hour walk with some friends with elevation change and pushed too hard and kind of still felt that for a while, right? That sensation of pain, right? I was just like, yeah, let's not push that hard like I did that time, right? Well, another reason is because I was carrying more weight, right? I'm like, yeah, let's not injure myself too much. You know, it's one thing to have a little bit of pain, but if it's signs or whatever, or you can sweep it off, you just rest for a little, let's say 30 minutes, an hour, and you're good again, you're fresh again, right? You know, because that original time I did it, I was just like, that 4 or 5 hours, I was like, yeah, I pushed way too hard on that at the end, right? I realized, I'm like, yeah, I got too cocky on that. I'm like, I should have knew my limits more, right? That's why I was just like, yeah, unlike that time, right? So I was remembering this experience. I'm like, yeah, let's not push that hard, right? Know my upper limits on it, right? You know, because unlike the previous time, right? Was there 2 times I had less weight on me, right? So like I've done distances that are longer with less weight, and I've done the exact same kind of distance and time period of doing it in lower, much lower temperatures, right? You know, I mean, even during that time when I did it back, what was it? I'm trying to remember. Ugh, now I hear mosquito. Wasn't it 2021, 2022? When, anyways, it was during. I know I'm pretty sure I posted it for March, but it was actually that trip was actually in February. But you know, during that time, I don't know if I mentioned it. I might have mentioned it before on our live stream where I mentioned the story. But like, I had, you know, I actually when I was walking back home in the winter, right? I actually didn't stop in anywhere inside to warm up. I could have. There was plenty of places I could just walked in, warmed up, right? I decided, no, I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna really simulate this a lot more, right? So like, kind of simulate something like, because I did this during the daytime, right? So obviously, stores, buildings, you know, convenience stores that are open, right? So I could have walked into a place warmed up if I wanted to, if it absolutely necessary, right? You know, if I felt the need for it, right? But I wanted to simulate something more like, hey, it's at something at night where, hey, all the stores are closed. There's nothing open. I can't go inside a place to warm up, right? The only thing I can do to warm up is keep walking, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. Because it was daytime and there was sun, I kind of put my back against a building in the sun, facing south. So I'm facing south, right? The sun's in my face. It's minus 17 Celsius, minus 0 Fahrenheit, right? And kind of absorbing that solar thermal energy, and it's bouncing off the wall behind me of the building, right? That's probably the closest I did to quote unquote warm up, right? As I kind of also during that time planned it in advance, right? Like it wasn't, oh, I'm just gonna do this out of the whim. No, I kind of planned it out, right? Hence, I had certain things with me to help me along. So obviously, dressing for the weather, right? I was dressed for that type of cold. I was trying to also trying out this buff that I kind of made earlier in an earlier video earlier in that year, right back in January, or could have been in December of the previous year, but one of the two, right? I was just like trying it out too, right? You know, like, and don't get me wrong, everyone. Like I've been colder than that, right? And I've obviously worn warmer clothes than before, right?
but I was just kind of getting a sense of it and their baseline of what the experience is like, right? Where I'm like, oh, okay, right, you know, like I know one of my subscribers said, and it looked like I had a red nose. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, right. You know, I had frost nip. Don't get me wrong. There was obviously right. I still had some exposed skin, but I mean, like, basically, you know, I came back. I think it was like I'm trying to remember tonight. I think it was afternoon by that time, right? You know, I had a nice warm meal, warmed back up. I was good with. I was back into that fresh state within an hour, right? So I was just like, okay, all right, you know. I think I came back and I had like soup and some warm hot coffee, right? I was just like, you know, and within let's see an hour, 45 minutes, I was like, because like literally as soon as I got home, I made some coffee and obviously warmed up, right? Because I've been exposed to those temperatures for a couple hours, right? At least, right? For what it is, right? You know, like I'm trying to remember what I had during that time, and without looking back at it, because it's not like I'm looking at this video back at my footage of it, or like I'm just trying to recall it by memory, right? Because I remember the trip very extremely fondly, right? It's one of those things because I can remember it, right? I remember where I went. I remember the temperature, right? I remember the time of year. It was snowy out, windy, windshield, and all that stuff, right? And I was just like, you know, you know, because like it's not like I haven't walked in the winter before, but in terms of distance and temperature, right? And the time, right? And I did this without quote unquote stepping into a building to warm up, right? You know? In all our situations, you know, if I really had to do it or whatever, yeah, I probably would, right? You know, warm up back of my hands, right? Like, I was remembering, okay, you know, like just sitting right here, I'm just sitting in a chair right now, right? And I was just like literally, I'm sitting in a chair right now, like it should, yes. I am literally sitting in a chair right now, in front of me. See, here's my cable, right? Here's the charger I'm using, right, for my device, right, while I speak of this, right. And make sure like I was remembering some other things that weren't in the past in the winter, right? So like, if my let's say because usually for me, my my thumb will get cold faster before my fingers, and that's probably no surprise because your thumb is the furthest away from your hand, right? Yes, I was wearing gloves or mitts, probably both, or a combination of both, right? So my fingers were warmer just because they're together, right? But my thumb, right? So, like, I could feel that frostnip kind of creeping in, right? So, those times that I did kind of stop for a moment or face the sun, right? Well, kind of what I did was like I would put my hand, my bare hand, right, underneath my armpit, underneath my jacket to warm up my thumb, kind of get the sensation back a little bit, right? Shake my hands, get the blood flowing back in, right? You know, I didn't do this whole rubbing my hands too much or slapping my hand. I kind of went old school. I'm like, yeah, back to this. Hand underneath my armpit, right? I've done this before, right? Like, like I did. Oh, there's another story too. There's definitely another story that where I have where, you know, where nowhere to lie. I kind of did this. It was a shorter distance. Not shorter distance, but a shorter time frame because I was using wheels because I was actually biking it. But you know, I learned that this from this other time that I did this where I biked for an hour, a little bit more than an hour, right? In minus 22 Fahrenheit.
-30 Celsius, right? You're probably like, holy cow, Siri, you did that? You crazy, dude. I'm like, yeah, for what it was. I mean, there was no, it was, it hadn't snowed for a while, so like, you know, the terrain was quite relatively clear sailing, right? There's not like snow or a lot of ice on the ground at that time, right? So I wasn't fighting that kind of terrain difficulty, but it's the wind, the windshield, the cold, right? Because remember, during that time, and that's the thing about that's the difference of compared to walking it, right? Because if you're walking, I could put my hands in my car, I could do whatever, right? While you're biking, it's just like your hands, your forearms are totally exposed. Your legs are gonna be warm probably because you're biking, you're cycling, right? You're moving your legs, right? But you ain't moving your arms or your hands that much, let alone your fingers or your thumb, right? Like I remember that time I was wearing at least 2 layers on my hands, right? And I still was starting to get frostnip on my thumb just because I'm not moving my hand enough, right? Because basically my hands are on the handlebars. The only thing I'm doing is shifting gears or braking, you know, squeezing the brakes, right? That's about it. You know, my hands are getting the full brunt of the windshield, right? The wind, right? And since I'm biking, there's always gonna be windshield because I'm riding into the wind for the most part, generally, right? Generally speaking, unless it was a tailwind, then there was a little bit of relief, right? And this is where I also learned not to blow into my hands during that time, right? Because once you do that, you gotta keep doing that, right? Because you keep introducing moisture in, right? But this is also where I started to do this whole, and there was another time, but putting my hand underneath my armpit to warm up my, not necessarily my fingers, but my thumb directly, right? Right. Obviously, that's gonna lower your core body temperature slightly because you're using your core body temperature to warm up a thumb, right? I mean, that is what it is, right? But my core body temperature went down slightly, but my thumb and my dexterity of my hands went up, right? And it's directly warming it up, right, through actual heat, warmth, or something that's warmer, right? And remember, everyone, during both of these, when I did the cold kind of thing, I did this without hand warmers, right? Yeah, I have hand warmers, right? You know, and I could dip into them, right? You know, most of the time during the winter, I have them in the bag, right? You know, I just don't use them that often, right? Or I don't resort to them unless absolutely necessary and I have no other options, or there are things that I could do, like putting my hand underneath my armpit isn't cutting it. Then maybe I would dip into that. It's just like I wouldn't dip into, let's say, something like fire or a heater unless absolutely necessary, right? You know, where I don't have any other options, right? Or the options that, or the passive options, or the body options that I do have, or whatever, right? Or the clothing options aren't cutting it. Then, yeah, maybe I would dip into that, right? Right. Because obviously, if I start to dip into something like that, yeah, I wouldn't have to do all that stuff. I could have stayed out longer. It would have been a little bit more comfortable, I guess, right? But the reason why I'm mentioning this is like I was starting to push my comfort zone, right? Where, you know, slight discomfort, right? You know, nothing life threatening or anything like that at that moment, right? I was still kind of relatively in control of what I was doing, right? You know, I had a safety net and all that stuff. Like, even though this last trip that I walking trip, right? Like it was relatively. I did this in ideal conditions too, right? It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It was sunny out, right? It wasn't even windy out, right? And stuff like that. Actually, I realized because when I originally left, not like left to go back home, but originally when I originally arrived, it was actually colder, right? So I actually, I almost felt like I was wearing too much. Just like I had to, like
I was actually, you didn't see me wearing them, but I actually had gloves or mitts, one of the two, right? But they were in my bag because I didn't need them on the way back home, right? Because like I said, it was like 10 Celsius, 50 Fahrenheit. I don't need them. I don't need gloves or mitts during that type of temperature, right? All right, because it's not like it was relatively same warm out, sunny too, right? Just that the snow was still on the ground or on the grass and it was still melting, right? And like I said in that video, bear in mind I'm doing this on foot, right? That kind of thing. I was just like, yeah. So that's why I kind of always remember that kind of stuff, is because I think it was, you know, not just the last time, the time before, the other time, that other story about the biking, right? And some other adventures too I've had along my journeys, right? I'm always remembering some of that pain, some of that discomfort, right? Where it's just like, yeah, let's not go for that again if I don't have to, right? Or at least mitigate that, right? Or at least have options to mitigate it, right? Options, right? So obviously gear in mind, but things I can just do even without quote unquote gear, right? Things that I have quote unquote on me, right? And stuff like that. You know? Like like you didn't see in that video that I did 6.2 miles, 10 kilometers in the winter, right? Because I never showed it. Because I was always when I was recording the footage, it was always facing forward. But at times, when the wind picked up, I turned my back to the wind and walked backwards. Because it was during the day, so I could see it, right? I don't usually do that, but it's just to cut the windshield on my front side, just for a brief moment, right? Or when that gust of wind shows up, right? Sometimes that gust of wind type of windshields can be very strong. I'm like, where it feels like it just bites right through you, or goes right through you, right? At times, right? Stuff like that, you know, and stuff like that. Like ever since I did that type of adventure, right? I've decided to like up my game on the clothing options that I have, right? Like, I keep hearing this buzzing behind me. It's kind of ticking me off. I can't see it, so I can't swap it. Oh, seriously, I can hear it. Seriously? Just, I should have. Oh, think of this. I'm wearing my buff here. I'll show you guys here. This other thing that was I could have worn in this other video I shown before, where someone thought I was wearing shake off. I could actually wear it right now. But I'm not getting bitten, but it's just kind of buzzing by my ear. And when you hear buzzing by your ear, right? First thing you think of is mosquitoes, right? Or something like that. Or the bugs or whatever, right? So yeah. What's my time? I know I already went over. Yeah, it's 19 after. So I'll probably go to the bottom of the hour. Oh, yeah. As soon as I say that, I see that mosquito. I tried to be like, grab it out of the air. Or whatever. Nope. That was an epic fail. Whatever. I guess it won't be outside or out here that much longer. But, like I said, I'm remembering those times because it's just like, and those experiences, right? Because I think it's important. Because therefore, and things that I learned from those experiences are tips and tricks, for lack of a better phrase, that I remember from them. Because any other time, or from now on, or in the future, today, tomorrow, the next day, next year, next month, whatever, if I gotta go through it again, or, excuse me, for real, or as an test or simulation, right? I'll remember, oh yes, I'll remember to warm up my thumb here, right now, right?
you know, shake my hands. Oh yeah, don't rub my hands together unless I'm wearing gloves or mitts already, right? I don't get blisters or whatever, right? Oh, and don't blow into your hands because you don't introduce moisture. Because if you keep doing that, you don't have to keep doing it because you're introducing moisture. Yes, it'll warm up your thumb, but because now your gloves or mitts are gonna get damp, and then it's gonna get cold after you stop it. Hence, you gotta keep doing it then, because once you do that, you're you're pretty much having to keep doing it because now your gloves or mitts are getting damp, right? And also, damp, wet gloves or mitts pull heat away. It's the way it is, right? Because water will draw heat away from the surface, right? Yes, it's gonna cool you off in the summer, but it's not gonna make your hands or whatever it's touching next to your skin cold again, right? Especially if there's windshield wind, right, and stuff like that. And I'm always like, yep, let's not do that. Let's not do that, right? Hence, I'm putting my hand underneath my armpit instead, because at least it's warm, but it's a dry warm, right? It's not a moist warm, right? that that will literally get cold and freeze afterwards, right? It's at least dry warm, you know. I can feel the warmth, but my hand's not wet. Because obviously, if I water will pull water and moisture will pull heat away, right? That's why it's so useful in the summer, right? Hydration, all that stuff, water, right? Well, water, or at least, or getting wet in the winter is just like big no no. Big no no, right? Big no no. And stuff like that. So I keep that in mind as much as possible. Because since I'm ending the stream a little bit, I guess I can unplug or remove it from my induction charger, my charger here, charging plate, whatever you want to call it, right? Rearrange a few things here while I'm at it, you know. Okay. Besides, I've been meaning to do this for a while, anyways. Not necessarily right now, so to speak, but I am to a certain degree, right? Hey, I actually have something here. Six stuff in here. You know, nothing too substantial, right? You know, maybe a little bit of cordage. You know, some sort of shelter element like a garbage bag, emergency Mylar space blanket, right? Stuff like that, right? You know, since then, you know, I haven't updated it yet. And technically, I haven't used the items within it. However, I have used a space blanket before. I have used a garbage bag before. I've used the garbage bag before in the rain, right? Because I had to do it. I had no other choice. I was down to that kind of option, right? Yeah. And that was one of rare times where I felt cold because of water, because of rain, right? Because it was really, really windy. And the thing is, I wasn't even that far from home, right? Right? And the other thing is, this was like one of those, last minute, last hour, it's some rain, right? That turned into pouring rain. And the temperature was like below 10 Celsius, below 50 Fahrenheit, right? And I felt cold. And that had to be one of the coldest times I felt because I was wet. There was wind, right? So the water's drawing heat away from me, and the exposure to I shouldn't say windshield, but to wind, convection, dropped my temperature, right? Right? For the same reason why it helps you stay cool in the summer. Well, that was kind of, right? Like, as soon as I got home, right, I instantly got out of those wet clothes, right? And I felt better as soon as I put on some dry clothes, right? But while I was wearing those wet clothes, heat's just, metaphorically and literally flowing right out of me, right? Right? You know? You know? Like, even if I was wearing wool, still, hey, wool can hold 80% of the heat, even if it's wet. It can still hold 80%, whatever the number that you hear is, right? Well, you're still losing 20% of your heat. You're still losing it. right? I mean, yeah, wet wool's probably better than wet cotton or wet polyester or nylon, but I mean, dry clothes are probably still ideal, right? You know, you know, because I also realized that before, like wool, as good as it is, yeah, you're yes cold or not as cold, but it's still pulling heat away from you to a certain degree because it is wet. Because obviously, wet wool will probably still feel colder or less warm still, in my opinion, than dry wool. I'm just saying, right? Like, what the water is still next to your skin, right? And sometimes wool can have that kind of. It's not unless it's really really dense. It might not block the wind still, right? So there's some exchange of heat energy, right, for the evaporation of said water, right? So it's just like, yeah. But this is just something like I said, I did a long time ago. I still have it, right? Perhaps one of these days I'll show a video on it, but at the moment, I'm just putting it away. Like, nowhere to away. Like, I have these already. I've had these for a while, right? Like, look. And stuff like that, right? I still have them, right? Because these are gonna be useful, right? I got, what, 5 right here. I bought these a long time ago. I actually kept parts of the packaging just to refer to it, right? Like, literally, I have the box right here, right? Extra strength contractor bag, right? Extra large 20 pack, right? I mean, they're not the thickest, right? But they're thicker than a traditional one that you would use in the kitchen or whatever, right? I mean, I've had these for a while. This is back when a long time. I've had these probably longer than many of my subscribers have joined me on the channel, or I've known some of my subscribers out there. Right? I'm trying to remember when. I don't know, 2016. It might be actually 10 years old. Actually, I actually think it is 10 years old now that I think. I'm actually pretty confident that it is 10 years old that I've had these contractor bags. Right? You know, you know. But this is back when. So this is back. Hold on a sec. This is, I mean, providing that they're still not disintegrating, it's still good, right? Like as long as because I've kept them away from the sun, right, and stuff like that. And you're probably like, "Hey, Sierra, what you do with the other ones, right?" Well, they're in some of my kits, some of my bags, right? I mean, I've actually used one, right? Not necessarily for the shelter element, but I had to put stuff in there, right? Because when I was originally trying it out, I actually decided to, well, technically put sticks in, let's just say, right? And technically, I did at least temporarily reclaim the bag and reuse it and braided that bag, right? Just for fun, right? Technically, I don't have it now, but I mean, I did use it, right? And like I said, I have used like a contractor bag, not specifically these ones, but I have used one as for a shelter element before in terms of against rain. I remember it fondly because I had to dip into that type of gear. I didn't want to, but it was the only option at that time, right? And like I said, I was not at home, and I was like in the middle, like in the middle, right? So I wasn't close enough to be at home, but I was too far away from my original destination, right? I was leaving, right? So I'm just like, I'm like, screw it, I'm dipping into it, right? Right. Now, obviously, since that time, I've upgraded a few things, right? Added a few things, like maybe I'll add in another garbage bag to use, so I don't have to dip into that one necessarily, right? Or a thicker one, or thinner one, right? Or actually bring a poncho or actually bring a rain jacket, right? Because that's the thing. It was like a 20% chance to showers. I was just like, right? Because I've experienced that before where I was just like, oh, yeah, I should have, like, still brought something, right? And this is why lately I'm just like, maybe I'll add in an, even a basic poncho, right? Because that's one thing about a contractor bag or a garbage bag, right? It's kind of harder to get the coverage, right? Because it's like, I mean, it might act the same as a poncho, but the shape, the size, like you're not get the size is different, right? So the coverage, especially if you want head cover, right? Because during that time when I did this, where I had to use one, I basically just made a hole at the top, made 3 holes for my head and my 2 arms. That's it, right? So my arms were still getting wet and my head was still getting wet. But my quote unquote core, chest, most of my body was still not getting as wet. Because when this first started, it was already raining and I was already outside, right? I thought, it'll just be a quick second. Right? Nope. I had to take shelter underneath something for a while. So I was already wet, right? I just didn't get more wet because I decided to put something over top to kind of resist or repel the rain, right? I was still wet though, right? So I still, like I said earlier, still had to dip into change into dry clothes as soon as I got back home. Like literally as soon as I got back home, like I'm barely even in the door, barely even taking off my shoes, right? And my shoes were wet and my socks were wet. I basically like already taken off like my shirt, and all that stuff that I was wearing, right? And stuff like that. So it was a very good example right there. It's like, yeah, let's not go for that again. Slight discomfort, but it made me experience being cold wet, right? It wasn't just that dry cold. It was that wet cold that a lot of people talk out about. That's kind of more serious, right? It's just like that wet or humid heat. It's a lot worse than the dry heat, right? For some people. So I'm been remembering that kind of stuff, right? And said backpack that I spoke about in that quote unquote getting back home video, where I didn't actually show the contents, barely showed the bag. This is the exact same bag, by the way. I know it is. Right? It's the handle, right? Right. I don't have much in here right now because stupid mosquitoes. I keep hearing them. You can probably barely hear it. Okay, and some kind of parachute type of cordage right here, right? You know. Stuff like that I could use if absolutely necessary or dip into, right? So I got this kind of stuff right here. It doesn't take up that much room and